les activités de cette institution sœur. Vous avez 7 minutes maximum.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, for giving me the floor. The technology was almost failing me, but I think we are back. Let me start by congratulating you, Chair, before I go into my presentation on being re-elected as Chair of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. We will continue to wish you every success in this endeavor. With that said, let me go now into the presentation. For the sake of those who may not know a lot about the African Union, I'll try to go a bit into detail whilst respecting the time. So basically, the African Union Advisory Board Against Corruption was established in accordance with the provisions of Article 22(5)(a) of the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. And this convention was adopted on 11th July at the second ordinary session of the Assembly of Heads of State. And so this year we are commemorating 20 years since the adoption of the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. So it's a year of a lot of commemorations, looking back on what has been achieved and what needs to be achieved. And the convention came into force on 5th August 2006, 30 days after the deposit of the 15th instrument of ratification. And to date, we have 49 member states of the African Union who have signed the convention, and 48 of those have gone ahead to ratify. We are still quoting 7 African Union member states who are yet to ratify the convention. We had hoped to attain universal ratification in 2018 when the board was running with the theme of the year, as 2018 was dedicated as the African Anti-Corruption Year. We failed in that year to attain universal ratification, and again we tried this year as we commemorate the 20th anniversary since the adoption of the convention. We are hoping that the 7 states, namely the Central African Republic, Djibouti, Eswatini, Somalia, South Sudan, as well as Cape Verde, who ratify the convention and proceed to implement its provisions. With respect to the mandate of the board, Honorable Chairperson, in keeping with the convention, the main mandate of the board is to promote and encourage the adoption of measures and actions by states parties to prevent, detect, punish, and eradicate corruption and related offenses in Africa, as well as to follow up on the application of all these measures. And we normally do this through review missions, where we go into a state party to the convention and see on ground how far the state party has implemented the provisions of the convention. And we also undertake studies to look at the behavior of the multinationals that are operating within Africa, so that we can then advise state parties and the African Union appropriately on these measures. And then specifically, the board has also been mandated by the convention to form partnerships with the African Commission and other stakeholders out of a realization of the connection between corruption and human rights. And in this regard, Honorable Chairperson, the fight against corruption is central to the promotion and protection of human rights. Corruption facilitates, perpetuates, and aggravates human rights violations, especially against women and girls. And hence, the board has a key role to play in combating corruption to guarantee the enjoyment of human rights. Chair, with that said, let me now move quickly to how the board is structured. The board is composed of 11 members who are experts in the area of anti-corruption and governance, and they serve in their personal capacity for a duration of 2 years, renewable once, and they serve on a part-time basis. Board members meet at least 4 times a year in ordinary sessions and may meet in extraordinary sessions as well. And during these sessions, strategic policy directions are set and the Secretariat is there to follow up and implement during the intersession. And the board is supported by a full-time Secretariat that is based here in Arusha within the AICC premises. And in terms of facilitating the implementation of the mandate of the board has set up working groups in specific areas, as well as designation of country rapporteurs who are supposed to lead on any work in their respective countries, whether it be an advocacy or review mission. The board also convenes the African Anti-Corruption Dialogue with national anti-corruption agencies from the member states as our key stakeholder, and we also commemorate the African Anti-Corruption Day, which falls on 11th July every year. And this day has been designated as the African Anti-Corruption Day since 2017. The board also undertakes country review missions, Honorable Chairperson, like I indicated earlier, to follow up on the implementation of the provisions of the convention. And the country review missions culminate in a country review report with specific recommendations to enhance the fight against corruption in respective state party. With respect to interaction with civil society and non-state actors, in keeping with Article 12 of the Convention, the board has a non-state actors forum that is normally convened on the margins of the African Anti-Corruption Dialogue. As I conclude this brief overview on the mandate and operations of the board, let me, on behalf of the AUABC Chairperson, Honorable Seinabu Ndiaye Diankate, reaffirm our commitment to enhance our collaboration, cooperation, and coordination in the execution of our mandates which complement each other. I thank you, Honorable Chairperson, for your attention.
Merci surtout d'avoir décliné votre part des responsabilités dans ce panel en 7 minutes maximum. Maintenant, après avoir eu l'aperçu des mandats de la Commission et ainsi que le mandat de l'Anti-Corruption Board, nous allons écouter l'honorable commissaire Solomon Aïle-Derso sur la question du renforcement des réponses régionales aux questions des droits de l'homme dans les industries extractives, la corruption et les flux financiers illicites en Afrique. Le rôle, bien évidemment, des deux institutions sera examiné. Honorable commissaire, vous avez la parole pour 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. A very good morning to all of you, colleagues, members of the Commission and staff of the Secretariat, distinguished delegates of this 77 organization. The Working Group on Extractive Industries, Environment and Human Rights has dedicated part of its effort in dealing with and addressing issues relating to the financial and fiscal dimension of the work and activities of business enterprises with a focus on extractive companies. Before I go in depth into that, I think it would be good to underscore the importance of this engagement between the African Union Advisory Board on corruption. I think it must be against corruption, right? It has been updated against corruption, and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. The intersection, as you rightly outlined, between the work of the Commission on the promotion of human and people's rights and the work of the board is very substantial. One of the contributions of the work of the board would be in creating the governance environment that is conducive to and free from activities that actually lead to the bleeding of the financial resources of a country, which would lead to the deprivation of the requisite resources for the promotion and protection of human and people's rights, apart from, of course, the direct impact that such bleeding of the resources of a country through various corrupt practices would have on human and people's rights, specific human and people's rights issues. During COVID, we have actually worked together at the Commission and the board. That was one of the instances in which we have highlighted this interrelationship and interlinkage of the mandates of the two organizations through the joint statement that we have actually issued as a Commission and as a board with respect to financial problems and corrupt practices that have been reported in documents as far as response measures to the COVID-19 pandemic were concerned. And what we need to do is really to build on those existing practices and have the relationship and the working arrangement to be much more systematic and institutionalized than ad hoc. We hope that we would be able to achieve that by harnessing the respective roles and responsibilities of the two organizations. The working group on extractive industries, environment and human rights violations, one of the activities that it had undertaken was the development of the background study on extractive industries, environment and human rights. A study that sought to present analysis of the wide range of human rights issues that arise in relation to the processes associated with the establishment and operation of extractive industries on the African continent. While these human rights issues cover a wide range of the rights and freedoms enshrined in the African Charter, there are specific areas that directly touch on the role and responsibility of the African Union Advisory Board Against Corruption. One of those that we have identified relate to the financial and physical dimension of the relationship between extractive industries and host countries. This is a very important aspect of that relationship. Depending on the nature of legal regulatory instruments in place, the strength of the licensing agreement between states and extractive industries, depending on also the strength of the institutions that are mandated with monitoring and enforcing the fiscal responsibilities and obligations of extractive companies, it is possible to identify, a set of issues in that respect. One such issue relates to, for example, the extent to which states are able to negotiate terms with extractive companies that gives them the requisite level of market level value for resources that are extracted and processed on the African continent. More often than not, as you know, the technical nature of the licensing agreement with extractive industries developed over many years, even preceding the post-colonial time, is such that when it comes to African countries, it provides only what may be considered to be under Article 21 of the Charter, exploitative terms, because it doesn't provide the value that those resources deserve from a market value perspective, as it happens in other regions of the world. So addressing that aspect of the issue is very important. But there are other aspects of the fiscal and financial dimension of the relationship that is of profound importance. One is issues relating to transparency. Transparency as far as the reporting of profits is concerned. Transparency as far as the use of various tax breaks as well as exemption of duties is concerned. How those legal benefits are used or exploited or abused matters a great deal and is of interest to the work of the advisory board. Again, other aspects where we have witnessed a major area of intersection have been identified, not just in our study in the background study, but also importantly in the state reporting guidelines and principles on Articles 21 and 24 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. There you find in detail the range of issues that the Commission have identified. For example, in the introduction, we identify as one of the major issues of concern for this Commission, which is of direct interest to the Advisory Board, is the lack of transparency about and egregious abuse by national actors of revenues received from the extractive industries and evasion of taxes. These are one aspect of the issue. The other, and not any less, perhaps even more egregious abuse, relates to the phenomena of illicit financial flows. There was a high-level panel established by the African Union and the Economic Community and the UN Economic President Mbeki exactly on this issue, and it has identified that nearly 90 billion US dollars are lost to illicit financial flows. And therefore Africa loses on a yearly basis, and this was subsequently, of course, further backed by a report of UNCTAD in 2020 as well. And what is the connection between illicit financial flows, which takes an enormous amount of money necessary for the development endeavors of the people of the continent, and extractive industries. And that is where, for example, UNCTAD identified that the extractive industry sectors is the principal culprit for illicit financial flows. Nearly over 40 billion US dollars out of the nearly 90 billion US dollars is attributed to the extractive industries sector. And that is why, for example, we also dedicated a thematic report in our earlier engagement at the Working Group on Extractive Industries, Environment and Human Rights on this specific phenomena. And indeed, late last year, we dedicated a panel or the year before actually, we dedicated a panel exactly on this one with the participation of the drafter of the UNCTAD report at that point in time. The upshot of all these issues that have been identified is that the phenomena of illicit financial flows is not something that can be regulated by national regulatory measures only. It requires the collective role and responsibilities of national actors, but also states working together, including at the level of, for example, the African Union, as have been done through the high-level panel. And one of the most important engagements that is currently underway as a result of the work of the panel is the proposal in the UN General Assembly for the adoption of a global tax regime. My time is over. I'll just make this last point and stop. A global tax regime that is being negotiated within the framework of the United Nations. This is something that is opposed by OECD countries, because OECD countries would like to give protection to these companies that are whose locus, legally speaking, is in these countries. And this commission would do well in lending support, together with the Anti-Corruption Board, to this process that is currently underway in the UN General Assembly, sponsored by the Africa Group in New York, actually. And at the level of the African Union, I think there is a need for a dedicated instrument that actually helps in strengthening national legal instruments and processes, but also provides a grounding for an effective role by the African Union in dealing with human rights issues and financial and fiscal corrupt practices associated with business enterprises, including those in the extractive industry sector. With that, I thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much. Nous remercions l'honorable commissaire Solomon Aïle-Derso pour son intervention. Maintenant, j'appelle Dr Jaffet. Donc, j'appelle d'abord Madame Martha Montali, qui va nous parler de la consolidation, de la promotion et de la protection des droits de l'homme et des peuples en encourageant la culture de la transparence et de la responsabilité dans la lutte contre la corruption. La transparence fait aussi partie des éléments que le commissaire Derso a souligné tout à l'heure. La transparence, le manque de transparence dans le domaine des industries extractives. Vous avez la parole également pour 10 minutes maximum. 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chairperson, and good afternoon, and protocols observed. I think the speakers before me have already highlighted in terms of the normative frameworks that have been provided by the African Union as far as promotion of human rights and also promoting the fight against corruption. I think to start with, we do recognize that the instruments have indeed revealed the will of the African Union heads of states and government by starting from the Constitutive Act of the African Union, which provides for the adoption of various instruments, and starting from the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And we see the adoption of the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption also coming in with the awareness that there's need to respect human dignity and foster promotion of the economic, social, and political rights of the citizens of Africa. And therefore, to be able to do that, there's need to deal with a scourge that is corruption. And we see the adoption of the convention in 2003 on the 11th of July as a demonstration after realizing that there's need to deal with corruption on the continent. And of course, there are other supporting normative frameworks, such as the African Charter on Democracy, election and good governance, as well as even the putting in place of the Africa peer review mechanism as a mechanism that promotes democracy and governance, etc., etc. I also just wanted to bring to attention some of the key objectives of the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption that highlights the importance of transparency and accountability. One of the objectives of the convention is to promote socio-economic development by removing the obstacles to the enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights, as well as civil and political rights. And we see also another key objective of the convention is to establish the necessary conditions to foster transparency and accountability in the management of public affairs. And further, the convention itself has provided principles on which the convention is based on. And we see the respect for human and people's rights also being key. And this is to be done in accordance to the provisions of the Charter on Human and People's Rights. And also very key, also as one of the principles, is to do with transparency and accountability in the management of public affairs. So how does the convention, the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption, promote this culture of accountability and transparency? As the Honorable Chairperson said, transparency is very key because it's unless the information is out there that we can be able to see if things are going well or they're not going well. And for the convention, for member states that have adopted the convention and ratified and deposited the instruments of ratification, the first thing that state parties are required to do is to be able to criminalize acts of corruption as offenses. Without that, it will be impossible to be able to follow up. As the AUABC, as the body that follows up, we do first, or as a core point, is to check if the state party has criminalized corruption. And we see the convention providing that the state parties are supposed in Article 7 to fight against corruption and any related offenses within the public service. And this is done, or the convention has provided that the state parties must designate public officials who should declare their assets at the time of assumption of duty. Because normally we see if people are gaining assets or wealth illicitly, or to the level that do not consummate with their earnings, and therefore the convention has obligated that public civil servant of some caliber or level should be able to declare their assets. And after they are exiting office or public office, then the officers must also check in terms of what they have acquired and if it comes with their earnings throughout that period. And also we see the convention mandating or obligating the state parties to ensure that they are putting in place committees within the public service that will establish code of conduct and also monitor its implementation, and also educating the public service in general on matters of ethics and integrity. And also we see the convention obligating state parties that they need to ensure transparency, equity, and efficiency in the recruitment processes as well as procurement processes. We see these areas as being key where acts of corruption do happen, people pay to be recruited. And also in the issues of procurement, I think this has been highlighted through research and a number of instruments. For example, Madam Charity talked about the 2018 as African Corruption Year, and there was a declaration that was adopted by member states, which is known as the Nouakchott Declaration on Anti-Corruption. And one of the areas that was highlighted in that declaration was the need to ensure that there's transparency and accountability in the procurement systems and mechanisms within the state parties. Therefore, we see countries putting in place measures to ensure that there is transparency, for example, e-procurement and others. And I think it was also said in terms of now how does a board assess or follow up on the implementation of the convention. We see the board, we do conduct country reviews, and therefore we do assess the compliance of the state parties on the provisions that have been provided in the convention. And the provisions that have highlighted the need for transparency and accountability, we do also, using our checklist, do assess. For example, I just talked about the issue of asset declaration. So when we go to the country to review how far they have gone in implementing the convention, as well as their general progress in the fight against corruption, we do check with, for example, with some countries have put in place bodies that do conduct these asset declarations. So we do meet them and ask what are the challenges that they are facing in doing that. I think Commissioner Deso also talked about issues of extractives. This is also an area that the board does review in our country review or in the reporting obligations of the state parties. Article 22, I think subsection 4 talks about, or one of the mandates of the board is to study the behaviors of multinational corporations and advise governments. And this is where most of these multinational corporations, they are working in the extractive sector. So we see the board and the commission working together through these studies and through even policy guidance in terms of how countries are supposed to negotiate their contracts, and even studying the behaviors of these multinational corporations, how they are opening. We see how the contractual process of them investing in the countries. We see one of the requirements of state parties also is to regulate the incorporation of foreign-owned companies, and that ties into to the behavior of the multinational corporation. We see how they got the contract, the investment procedures, and to be able so that AUABC can now advise our countries on that. And we also see the role of whistleblowers in the fight against corruption, and we see the rights, for example, of access to information, which most of the whistleblowers do use to whistle their blow. And the Article 12 of the Convention has provided that state parties do provide access of information to the media and the civil society. So in our country reviews, we do check to what extent the civil society being, is there a conducive environment that has been put in place within the state parties. So we do check if the countries have access to information laws, for example. Is there open budgeting? Do citizens are able to access information such as budgets, expenditures, so that we can see if the government or the state party has provided a conducive environment for the citizens to be able to report and to get access to information. We just had a session with our colleagues from Amnesty International where we also saw recommendations on how whistleblower protection mechanism can be enhanced. So in a nutshell, that's how the board is able to promote issues of transparency and accountability, and we do assess them in our country reviews, and that information is reported through our annual report to the executive.